Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Jay Sticky.
And we have a guest with us today.
Aloha, Travis Don Kailikea Paradea.
This is a guy that I met in... A guy? That sounds disrespectful. A strapping young man. This is a scholar and a gentleman that I met on my trip to Hawaii in January. We got to talking, and I learned a lot about or at least somewhat about the Hawaiian separatist movement, which I thought was really interesting. And so I wanted to have Travis on here to talk about that, as well as, in general, the political situation in Hawaii. When I met you, you were a tour guide, but you had also just recently finished a degree in, I believe, political science? Am I remembering correctly? It's been a couple months.
No, I finished my undergraduate degree in political science back in 2011, and I wanted to move on to master's program, but life gets in the way. But The subject of my master's program was the location of Hawaii. Well, what I would like to, the thesis I was trying to walk in with is by 1840, the Hawaiian Kingdom had embassies in 13 different countries, and I think another 6 countries have minor diplomatic relations and therefore just consulate. What became of these buildings and those places, no one could say. So I at least can say that I went to the UK and I found the location of the Hawaiian embassy and the consulate. Oh. And I wanted that to be a thing that just kind of continued.
What is the building used for now?
In the UK, pretty much none of them are the same. There's really nothing left over. There's a couple places like the building in Edinburgh and Leith and the building in Glasgow are the same on the outside, but nothing is left. I could at least say, this is more or less the GPS point of where the Hawaiian flag used to fly. And, I always wanted to go check out the one in Hamburg, Germany, and any of the ones in France.
Was that because in Britain they lost it due to the World War II bombing?
I can't say for sure. That's why that street went down or why that particular building was gone in a lot of these places. I think a lot of it's... That's a good question. I didn't dig into that part of it.
Okay. I wanted to kick this off by... mentioning just how much people don't realize that Hawaii was very recently an independent nation. I think my favorite example of this is when the Ben Affleck movie Pearl Harbor came out a few years ago. They used throughout the movie the American flag everyone today is familiar with the 50 stars on it, which was horribly historically inaccurate. I'm not sure about horribly, but it was very historically inaccurate because Hawaii wasn't a state yet, and nobody that was working on the movie thought of that or noticed it at the time. What was the state of Hawaii at the beginning of World War II? Was it a protectorate or a colony? What did they call it?
My position here is not going to change whether or not we're talking pre-World War II or now. It's an occupied nation. But more to the point, it would be a territory. Hawaii was, quote, a territory in 1898 until...
How did this happen? Because it was an independent nation, like you said, and a monarchy with its own diplomatic relations with a lot of countries. How did it end up a state?
Well, to take a moment here real fast and just clarify a couple of things. So I'm just one. I mean, I like the way you describe me as just one guy. I like I like to tell everybody on my van, at the end of my tour, what I'm really hoping for here is that someday in the future, you folks will be sitting around in your living room. Maybe somebody will watch something on TV about Hawaii or read something about Hawaii, and you'll look at each other and you'll say something like, "You remember that guy on that van? He talked about this." That's what I'm really hoping for. And so just one haole guy from Kona. The name Kailikea comes to me a little bit later, but that might take up too much time for the podcast. I'd best be described as a Hawaiian national in waiting. So that means I have no choice but to support the reformation of the Hawaiian government so that I can get a minister of the interior to deliver my naturalization test, which I'm sure I will ace. Especially when people hear me talk, lots of assumptions can be made. So just wanted to clarify, I'm 0% Kanaka Maoli, but when we talk about the Hawaiian Kingdom, you get ethnic Hawaiian people, and that's ethnic Hawaiian people is the Kanaka Maoli. But when the Queen was overthrown in 1893, our largest group of subjects, citizens, was Japanese. Okay. So the Hawaiian Kingdom is not this tribal confederation that most people in North America think of it as. It was a nation state with a cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic population.
The Japanese were all Hawaiian citizens?
A lot of them were Hawaiian citizens, but this actually gets right to the heart of your question. So we'll start launching into that.
Was it the majority of the population was non-native? They were Japanese?
The largest ethnic. No particular group could have been called the majority at the time.
Gotcha.
As of now, as far as racial composition of Hawaii, makes up 37%. It's the largest single group.
Yeah, I like to say, to help with the narration of the history itself, Japanese people are our largest ethnic group from about 1890 to 1990. Nowadays, it's Filipino. Largely, Tagalog speakers of Ilocano and Visayans.
What's caused the Filipino population to increase so much? Has it been immigration?
Yeah, I think part of it's going to be immigration, but, there's a large Filipino population even during the time period of the kingdom anyway.
And were these Japanese people or Filipinos at the time, were they citizens of the kingdom as well?
Some were, but that's why I think that's why I want to come back to the question you stated. Or have you say it one more time, because I think the question is, how did Hawaii become a state?
How did Hawaii become a state then?
So let us start there, because now I'm just going to be weaving the tale, I suppose. And so for most people who want to discuss the overthrow, when you think about Hawaii history, we have two dynasties in the Hawaiian Kingdom. We have two different ruling families. The Kamehameha family forms one country out of all the islands. I'm going to say 1795. That's the last big battle. And from 1795 to 1874, the Kamehamehas rule the Hawaiian. In 1874, we go through quite the change. We go from the Kamehameha dynasty to the Kalakaua Kawananakoa dynasty.
How did they switch to the new dynasty?
Oh, so the Hawaiian Kingdom was a constitutional monarchy, and in 1874, it became clear we were out of heirs and successors for the Hawaiian throne. Actually, in 1872 that became clear when King Kamehameha V, Lot Kapuaiwa, he was getting sick, so he was kind of restricted to his bed. And on his birthday, the doctors are like, "Yo, Your Highness, you really should, I don't know, name an heir." and Lot says, "Nah, the good Lord won't take me on my birthday."
Oh boy!
Well, he was dead a few hours later, and
You don't tempt fate like that. Come on.
yeah,
Right.
for real. Right? And so that means the Hawaiian Kingdom had an issue, right? We had no heir, no successor to the throne. There's a vacant throne. You guys know what usually happens when there's an empty throne, right?
Civil War, yeah.
Yeah, we all seen that TV show, I trust. But lucky for us, the Hawaiian Kingdom was a constitutional monarchy from 1840 onward. Thanks to Kauike'i Auuli, King Kamehameha III, our kingdom looked a little bit like the UK. We had a House of Lords, a House of Commons, a High Court, and a Prime Minister we call the Kuhina Nui, who worked under the king on the executive branch. And according to our constitution, should there be no heir, no successor to take the throne, instead of fighting about it, we're supposed to have an election from among the available high chiefs and elect the king. That's, remarkable. In my understanding of world history, I can only highlight for you 4 countries that have elected a monarch. The Hawaiian Kingdom, the Holy Roman Empire, Poland, and
Hey.
Belgium.
Okay.
Belgium, I don't really want to talk about that one. It worked out real well for the Belgians, real bad for the Congolese.
The whole thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Not that it's not equally fascinating, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. But that puts the Hawaiian Kingdom on a short list now. So in 1872, after Kamehameha V dies, we elect King William Charles Lunalilo. This guy's on character on his own right. Lunalilo was a big fan of Shakespeare. There was a couple times Lunalilo got a little too drunk and decided he wanted to ride around Honolulu, rehearsing the entirety of Macbeth on horseback.
Wow.
So, I feel like in the short time we have, that's the character Lunalilo I'd like to get across. The guy was witty, literary master, and he ruled as king for a year. He died the following year in 1873 of tuberculosis. And Lunalilo also failed to name an heir or successor. He might have wanted to name Queen Emma. It might have been that Lunalilo himself, a bit of an advocate of democracy, and he failed to name an heir or successor on purpose. Hard to say exactly there, but that's what happened. So, a year later, we're back to having to have a royal election to decide who. And Lunalilo, so although I'm not saying, you had King Kamehameha I before 5, and then you have King William Charles Lunalilo, who is by all technicality King Kamehameha VI. He does not take the name; he feels slighted by the greater family. But yeah, when Lunalilo dies, and we go back to this election in 1874, we have our second royal election to elect our next monarch, and we elect David Kavika Laamea Kalakaua, better known as King Kalakaua, also called the Merry Monarch, whose name this big hula tournament is happening right now, the Merry Monarch Hula Festival. But importantly, David Kalakaua is not a Kamehameha. He belongs to a different high chiefly family. He belongs to a different dynasty, the Kalakaua Kawananakoa dynasty. And when we talk today about the current crown princess of Hawaii, while there are differing opinions on the matter, I would say it's pretty clear, personally, that the obvious crown princess of Hawaii, her name is Abigail Kawananakoa Campbell. So notice the name Kawananakoa. She's part of the second dynasty in that regard. And she's about 98, if I remember correctly. She's worth about $300 million. She lives primarily in Southern California. But
Oh, wow.
the medical care and whatnot is better. Also, she owns lands, from Southern California all the way to Northern Washington, of course. House on every island. The family made a lot of money in real estate. I don't want to come off too negatively about that princess. The thing is, when you first hear about her, you're like, what? But the more I got to know about her, the more I realized she's more benevolent and active than I thought. She's just
Okay.
And her nephew Quentin Kawananakoa Campbell is largely the next in line after that.
Okay.
But so it's worth noting that we have two dynasties. As you learn more about Hawaiian history, that's an important fact to keep in mind. It will help you understand some of Hawaiian. So there's lots of Kamehamehas alive today. There's many people who would like to be Kamehameha the Eighth. Continue to support royal organizations and what are clearly the titled lords of Hawaii. Anyway, my opinion is that the Kamehameha family no longer has claim to the throne, and I think it's a relatively high, well-shared opinion. But Kamehameha the Great had 56 plus children. There's lots of Kamehamehas.
Is that something that is a point of contention within the current movement? Which royal family is the rightful successor?
It used to be a more larger point of contention, I think. In the modern era, it's kind of become less, because people realize that's not the issue that needs to be on the front burner. Being a constitutional monarchy, we technically don't actually have to have a named monarch to have a functioning government, right? We have all of the offices are spelled out. That issue could potentially go on the back burner for 100 years until we're ready to have an election. But it used to be a point of great.
Does the monarch not have a great deal of power then in this constitutional monarchy?
It depends on what constitution we look at. The Hawaiian Kingdom went through a couple constitutional revisions. In the first one, the monarch, as designed by Kamehameha III, is relatively moderate. I mean, Kamehameha III was a freaking absolute monarch who gave up absolute power voluntarily and made himself a constitutional monarch because he thought that was what was good for his. He was influenced heavily by the French, and so therefore his constitution is beautiful. But then later on, Kamehameha V gives more power to them, and then later on, King David Kalakaua is forced into a kind of corner and forced to sign a new constitution. A lot of the power from the monarch into the hands of the.
Is there broad consensus as to which constitutional version would be re-implemented?
I wish there was a broad consensus about anything we talk about today. Sadly, there's not. That's actually part of the greater issue is, of course, no broad consensus.
Okay.
I would say that, so to clarify, a lot of the rhetoric you will hear from me today is originally espoused by a man named Dr. Keanu Sai. That name sounds familiar. His cousin is Keanu Reeves.
Oh!
Keanu Reeves, my understanding, is from Hilo. Dr. Keanu Sai is a fascinating man on his own right. You can check out the HawaiianKingdomGovernment.org website. He actually has the various Hawaiian Kingdom constitutions available online for your perusal.
Which one does he...
Perusal sounds weird. Perusal.
Either one. It's dialect. Which one does he prefer of the constitutions?
So some of this, I would say... I don't know where his position is now. I should also clarify, I've been working full-time for many years now. I don't really have a lot of time to pay attention to what's been happening. I mean, I put in a lot of oral testimony for county council bills and whatnot on my island. But so I try, I'm involved in my direct local community, but I'm not sure where Dr. Kianasai is exactly up to today. But when I was involved with this as an undergrad and just general auxiliary person, I think the general understanding was legally we would have to revert to this bayonet constitution, the one that was forced on David Kalakaua. But the silver lining is because that constitution neutered the monarch as hard as it did, it makes it easier for us to ignore who is the monarch for a long time.
Okay. So how did this constitution get forced by bayonet point onto the monarchy?
You see how fast I get on tangents, but I'm trying to stay focused. My main course here, as you might have detected, was the royal election of 1874. And to get to the one question, and this is kind of where I got weird when you asked me, where all the Filipino and Japanese citizens, yes and no. The Hawaiian Kingdom itself being a relatively modern country, so they have naturalization, all of that. And this was part of the debate that leads us to the overthrow in the first place. Shall our Asian immigrant laborers, shall they have a path to citizenship? Shall they not? What a modern debate that thing is right there. Because, of course, I think the king and the royalty of Hawaii were more than pleased to welcome these people in as citizens and have them voting because they knew that they would vote for the king's party, the king's platform. But, of course, their employers, the sugarcane planters did not want their employees voting. So this becomes, I'll come back to as part of the greater conflict and issue at hand. But Again, I want to revisit my 1874 thing here. So, as you learned a little bit ago, King David Kalakaua, the Mary Monarch, was elected to power in 1874, thus changing our dynasty and changing our foreign policy direction. So, lots of kamaaina here in Hawaii. We know King David Kalakaua was elected. We're taught that in school. What we're not taught is who his opponent was in the election. It was Queen Emma Kaleleo Nalani Na'ea Rook, the widow of King Kamehameha IV, the great-grandniece of King Kamehameha I. She's personal friends with Queen Victoria of England. We have I don't know how many years of letters between Queen Emma of Hawaii and Queen Victoria of England. They met face to face. Queen Emma and King Kamehameha IV converted our royal family to Anglicanism. Queen Emma was an Anglican. She belonged to the British Church. In fact, she's a quarter British. Her grandfather was a British sailor. When she met Queen Victoria in person, Queen Victoria was quite smitten with her and gave our queen a lock of her hair, which is kind of disgusting, but I assure you that was a big deal in the 1800s. Anyway, so we're talking in 1874, we have the pro-British Kamehameha Queen, Queen Emma. By the by, remember, she's the widow of Kamehameha IV. So that means Hawaii had a single lady running for head of state in 1874. Queen Emma versus King David Kalakaua. I guess I already did the spoiler. He won. But King David Kalakaua is pretty assuredly the pro-American side of Hawaiian Kingdom politics. When we look at his political campaigning and advertising, he's literally campaigning himself as the friend of American business, the friend of the sugar planters.
Take it you're not a fan of him?
I mean, I don't want to. I mean, yes. I mean, in the sense that you can tell I love Queen Emma. David Kalakaua himself, I have a bit of mixed feelings about his kingship, but I think you will find that he is, of course, the beloved Mary Monarch. But when we look at our newspapers at the time period, it took him a little while to get to that beloved status. He was not super popular at first.
Curious what caused him to be unpopular versus popular. What won people over to his side eventually?
I think part of it is the changing eras and the continuation. While Queen Emma was alive, this continues to be a source of consternation for his government because pretty much anything he does, he has to make sure there's an open seat for Queen Emma, even if she doesn't come. But the Queen's Party, by the way, takes over the legislature, so there's much gridlock. How modern is that? Huh? So the executive was one different party than the legislature, and so therefore legislative gridlock. Oh my goodness, I would say. Jace, the best answer to that question was a concerted effort on the part of Kalakaua to take care of his people and be a good king. That's what changed.
Okay.
But yeah, the election itself is fascinating, gentlemen. So I've tried to set the stage here. So we get the pro-British Queen Emma versus the pro-British Kamehameha Queen versus the pro-American sort of businessman David Kalakaua. And this election, it has features today we all going to recognize. You ready? First feature. CD campaign funding, dark money in support of both candidates to support directly their political advertising. We don't even know where some of that money came from to this very day. And because of that seedy dark money campaign funding, of course, our royal election in 1874 was plagued by accusations of foreign interference and collusion. Wow, that sounds familiar. Both of our candidates got in trouble for appearing before Hawaiian court judges and ministers and saying stuff like, hey, if I get elected, maybe we don't have to investigate this thing over here. The mudslinging about each other's families and heritages became commonplace in the newspaper. Vicious mudslinging. The Hawaiian Kingdom's newspapers was much like Facebook today. I mean, in the sense people like to troll each other and whatnot, letters to the editor.
I'd love to read some of those.
Yeah, some of it's just awesome. And King David Kalakaua's genealogist tried to say Queen Emma's grandmother was a man. Wow. Rude. I remember I came across this particular set of exchanges where the people were discussing the candidates' finger sizes, and at first I was like, "Oh my gosh, finger sizes? Is this 20? Wait! I feel like I just heard this sometime in 2016. Finger sizes." As I got more familiar with it, what I realized I was reading was both of our candidates for the throne are notable musicians, so that's why finger size was being brought up, because they were musicians. So a little higher brow than the modern day stuff. But during this election and looking at people's, the political advertising, looking at people, reactions to some of this, the election, I'm sorry I didn't brush up. The election continues longer than you might think. It's like most of 1874 is engaged in this royal election, or part of 1873 and the first part of 1874.
Oh, wow.
And
hey, who gets to vote in these elections? I'm not sure if you said that already.
I did not. Sadly, the Hawaiian Kingdom, the voting, the voting was relatively restricted. Depending on which time we're looking at, you either have to like pass a particular literacy test, or you have to own land, or you have to be male. There are some times of this that it gets a little restrictive and looks a lot like modern democracy.
Could the Japanese workers on the sugarcane plantations, were they allowed to vote?
No, not at first. If you come in as an immigrant, like with a green card, of course, you have very little ability to change the government. The big fight was whether or not we make them into citizens.
How many have they been there for like multiple generations, or were they recent immigrants?
Japanese are slightly more recent. I just want to caution everybody today. I'm one guy who used to be really, really well studied. So used to be being the key point here. So, in my understanding, we see very early on in the kingdom's history, you get the British, Americans coming out, Germans coming out, Chinese people coming out. Korean people actually got out here, I think, in a decent number, even before Japanese people. The Japanese come later because the sugarcane planters are clamoring for more and more cheap labor for their sugarcane plantation. And, the Hawaiian people were dying off in droves, disease. We lost like 9/10 of our population in like 100 years. So they needed some sort of source of cheap labor. And at first they wanted to open the doors to American workers. And I think that that part kind of scared the Hawaiian royalty. So they said, no, we're going to pick someplace else. And the sugar planters were like, well, then where else? Anyway, King David Kalakaua himself, an interesting modern Renaissance man of a king. I mean, he's the first reigning monarch to circumnavigate the globe. He's got several titles, published. He's got several books. He's got 20, 30 original compositions on piano and guitar. He's the guy that popularized the instrument we call the ukulele. So Kalakaua, part of his world travel, like his first, like I'm going around the world deal, part of it was diplomatic, and part of it was trying to solve this question of where we shall import mass amounts of labor from. So while Kalakaua is traveling around the world, he's looking at all these different cultures. And when he went to Japan, in Nippon, David Kalakaua was like, wow, look the way the Japanese treat each other with the bowing. They're so respectful. This is the most Hawaiian thing I've seen in all my travels. And so he started to make those inroads with, I believe, Meiji at the time, and set it all up so that it was David Kalakaua that determined that the floodgates shall be open to Japan. And that is where we are later. And I would say the Japanese don't start arriving in mass until the 1870s.
So how long does he reign for?
David Kalakaua's reign is 1874 to 1891. Oh, and let's revisit that election real fast, gentlemen. One more thing. So after, and I'm sorry, I mean, I just will go ahead and say it again, because that was a good question, Jace, is who gets to vote? Largely men, wealthy landed men. Well, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be wealthy, but people with their own property.
Domain, yeah.
Yeah, and then can pass literacy tests and whatnot. And I'm not sure if it was ever opened up for female. But so this election of 1874, you have all these very modern issues, the accusations of foreign interference and collusion, dark money, blah, 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 blah. So the election day comes, and fun fact, the Hawaiian Kingdom had a popular vote. The popular vote wasn't that old. The popular vote for the monarch in the Hawaiian Kingdom was made during that previous election, because David Kalakaua tried to tell the king-elect Lunalilo in 1873, this first election, he said, oh, you only win because the people don't get a vote. And Lunalilo was like, well, you think so? Well, the people are going to get a vote to show you how much they love me. And when King Lunalilo was elected, not only did he win a large portion of the popular vote, but he won the legal bearing vote, the one that matters, the House of Lords vote, the Electoral College vote. But then Lunalilo, as you heard, he died a year later of tuberculosis. So now we're back to this election of 1874 I was talking about. And in this election, depending on what pollster and source we're looking at here, it would appear that Queen Emma won like 70% of the population. But that one doesn't matter. Yeah, David Kalakaua won like 70% of the House of Lords vote. And, and so the House of Lords comes together and they vote. And David Kalakaua is king-elect, and they tell the courier, okay, get in the carriage, take these messages to the rest of the kingdom. You tell everybody David Kalakaua is the king. And then the guy goes up to the top of Ali'iolani Hale, our legislature building, to address the crowd that was in front of our legislature, our capital. And I don't know, 1,000 plus people were there that day waiting outside the legislature to hear the results of the election. And when it was announced that David Kalakaua was king-elect, they turned furious and they attacked our legislature. So this mob of angry people who was unhappy with the result of the election. And I don't blame them. I mean, this is where, I like to make these comparisons to modern elections, but here we just strayed very far from a modern American election. When was the last time an American president won 70% of the popular vote? That don't happen. So anyway, so these people, they attacked the legislature building. That poor guy that was supposed to get in the carriage and tell the rest of the kingdom that David Kalakaua was king-elect, they seized upon his carriage, ripped it apart with their bare hands, and pretty much beat him to death with pieces of his own carriage. And then they swarmed into the building, and they began attacking lords of Hawaii. Some of them were thrown out the second-story window. And there's this very interesting episode where I might be wrong about this. I'm pretty certain the guy in question was our foreign minister, a Scotsman named Robert Crichton Wiley. And as these rioters attacked our legislature building, they came to the hall of the Hawaiian Kingdom records, and they were ready to just burn everything down and destroy it. And this Scotsman convinced them not to do it. And thank God, because those land titles today are, of course, still helping Hawaiian people reclaim their land in a legal sense. And so in order to calm down the population of Honolulu, because it took 48 hours to deal with this episode, because the people of Honolulu were inconsolable. David Kalakaua lands two regiments of American Marines and a regiment of British Marines. You got to remember, by this time, David Kalakaua, the Hawaiian Kingdom, have already been the main halfway point in the Pacific for 100 years or so. There are always foreign warships somewhere nearby. So he brings in these Americans and British to control his own people. And he smartly sends the British regiment to go deal with Queen Emma. And it would appear that when the British showed up, Queen Emma was like, yeah, let's go get this guy. We'll knock him off you guys are here to arrest us. Oh, whoops. But Queen Emma, and you see this a lot with Hawaiian monarchs, they really gave a shit about their people. That's probably not the nice way to say it, but they cared. They cared about their people. And I'll go ahead and make the point that I don't care what system of government we're talking. What matters is are the rulers making practical policy that affects the lives of forget ideology. What are the people being served, And in the case of Hawaii's monarchy in the 1800s, I think, yes, they cared deeply. They tried very hard. So Queen Emma, when her supporters went to jail, she bailed them all out, and this becomes kind of a Hawaiian tradition, bailing your supporters out of jail. And the current crown princess, she bailed the first couple dozen guys that was arrested on Mauna Kea in 2015. She bailed them out of jail, and she said, I just don't want to see Hawaiian guys going to jail over there.
Is this where the foreign military powers start taking a direct hand in Hawaiian politics?
Yes and no. There's always kind of this push and pull with the colonial powers throughout the 1800s, but I would say I'm highlighting that particular event, him landing foreign troops, because this sets a precedent that will become important in 1893 with the overthrow of his sister and the landing of American Marines to interfere with the Hawaiian politics. And then one other thing to bring up real fast about that, the other reason I was highlighting it is that, again, David Kalakaua does not start off as a particularly beloved monarch, but he does become that. And one of the first things that he does, and part of the thing he was campaigning on, is, again, being the friends of American business and friend of sugar planters. One of the first things that David Kalakaua does as king is he leases Pearl Harbor to the U.S. Navy. And in exchange, the U.S. allows Hawaiian sugar to be imported to the U.S. Mainland duty-free, no taxes, no tariffs. Ah. And this deal to lease Pearl Harbor was something that had been discussed during the past two administrations at various intensities. So you see this push and pull going on, but I would say this is the first time foreign troops are landed on behalf of the Hawaiian government to control their own people.
How did this come to a head in 1894, was it, you said?
1893 is the overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani, I think January 2nd. So yeah, let's examine the reign of David Kalakaua, because I think part of what I was trying to get at there is, again, I just don't want to come off as vilifying David Kalakaua. I mean, maybe he was a better musician than a statesman. I don't know what to say, but he was a beloved monarch. Yeah. So one of the first things he does is I'm highlighting the Pearl Harbor thing because it shows who his constituency is, right? Who he's rewarding once he becomes king. And so who he's rewarding is this class of sugar planters, right? I shudder to Americans. They're pseudo-American. And during his reign, he comes into great conflict with them. And so at first, they're his buddies. But during the course of his reign, the relationship begins to sour over several things. First, the status of our Asian immigrant laborers. Shall they have a path to citizenship? Shall they not? Two, the status of opium. Shall opium just be a black market drug, or shall we raffle off licenses to distribute it, thereby making it a controlled substance. Big
Oh,
point of contention between the king and these sugar planters.
which position did he hold?
Kalakaua wanted to raffle off licenses.
Okay, nice.
The importance of hula in Hawaiian language is governmental function. These lords of Hawaii, these sugar planters, they are very New England. So they saw the hula as lascivious and inappropriate at all times. Okay, to be fair, we still totally had one hula where we celebrated the king's genitals. But you want the guy to have heirs, for goodness sakes. And it's nice hula. So they had much disagreements about what is appropriate at official government ceremonies. And here's the one place that I would actually probably support these sugar planters at the time. David Kalakaua was a very spending monarch. I believe he put the Hawaiian kingdom truly into debt for the first time. But, the things that he spent money on are like the fact that we had electricity and telephones in our Capitol buildings before the White House and Buckingham Palace. What is the price of those bragging rights? I don't know. You can put a price on bragging rights like that. But
it was expensive, rain.
Yeah, if I was there in 1874, I'd be like, Your Highness, maybe let's not stay. Anyway, and then so all of these fights about these interests of the Hawaiian kingdom and these internal politics, if you will, they eventually lead to this faction of these like sugar planters and these pseudo-Americans. They pull one over on Kalakaua with the help of the judiciary and a bunch of other people and force him to sign this bayonet constitution in 1887, which kind of neuters David Kalakaua's power. And I think at that point, David Kalakaua was like, oh, well, fuck you guys. I'm going to go hang out in Kailua Kona at Kūlehe'e Palace. So I feel like he gave up a little bit. And then so when his sister comes to power, when Queen Liliuokalani takes the throne in 1893, she actually inherits all those same fights. Nothing has changed. The immigrant labor fight, opium, importance of Hawaiian language and ceremony and hula, and the, accusations about how much money the crown should spend, how much it's allowed to spend, whatever. She inherits all those fights, but she also inherits a new one. She's female. During the election of 1874, we found out, if you look at some of this political advertising, the British, Queen Victoria is ruling like half the world. I should point out, by the way, I talk a lot about Queen Victoria. In the English language, we define the era as the Victorian era. But, I had some Chinese high school students come to the palace one time, and they saw the picture of Queen Victoria, and they said, she's the world's biggest drug dealer. I was like, oh my God, you're right. She was the world's biggest drug dealer. Holy shit. But back to the point, so Queen Victoria was like ruling half the world. So the British didn't really have an issue with women in power. But you see the opposite side from Kalakaua's side, this pro-American camp is like saying all this stuff like, we must not let the petticoat wear trousers. Women are incapable of running a country. So this is the other side of the fight that leads to the overthrow of the queen, is that these guys, they are not to be ruled by a woman. So I would say all those things combined lead to enough of a political sort of situation where Queen Liliuokalani accuses these sugar planters, these pseudo-Americans of treason. Now, she doesn't have a prosecutor. She's not bringing charges against them. She just says it because she's pissed. And they spin that along with the yellow press and like the first beginnings of mass media into the queen, saying that she's going to have them executed because, of course, the punishment for treason in the Hawaiian kingdom is the same punishment it is for the United States today, hanging. So, but she wasn't bringing charges. She just accused them of that. But they spun this into a whole thing, and they went to the American plenipotentiary minister at the time, this guy, John L. Stevens, and they told John L. Stevens, hey, the queen is threatening us. American lives and property are in danger. And at first, John L. Stevens is like, you guys are American? But then, enough money changed hands under the table there. And he's like, oh, yeah, so I see you're dual national. Your parents came over as missionaries and they continued to marry American. And so therefore, even though they were born outside the territory of the U.S., you're an American citizen.
Because that's how that works.
Yeah, you have to have, if you're born outside the territory of the U.S., you have to have both your parents got to be Americans. And then if you're born on the soil of the U.S., actually, fun fact, so Keanu Sai got in a bunch of trouble because if his argument is true, that Hawaii is just an occupied nation, that funny enough really undercuts the whole Obama being a citizen of the U.S. And so he kind of withdrew some of his arguments in his lawsuit at the time with the State Department because he didn't want to complicate it further. It's already a fucking huge issue, so why not? Anyway, who wants to give Donald Trump ammo? Fuck no one. Anyway, okay, so I was just skating around to they overthrew the queen. These guys, they're pseudo-Americans, right? I mean, I shudder to call them Americans. They call themselves missionaries, but it's bullshit. There's not a missionary in their political party. It's a political party called the Missionary Party. And no missionaries in that party. Their grandfathers were missionaries, sure, but these guys are international businessmen. Anyway, so they appealed to this American minister, John L. Stevens. Enough money changes hands, and he's like, "Yes, I agree. We will land American Marines to protect American lives and property." And so these Marines come and they surround the Iolani Palace and the Iolani Hale. Because somehow our Capitol and legislative building, our executive Capitol and our legislative Capitol buildings are somehow American lives and property. And they forced the Queen into house arrest. These Marines generally occupy Honolulu for some time. And Queen Ilokolani surrenders directly to the U.S. She does not abdicate as uni places. She surrenders directly to U.S. As opposed to these guys that are the ones that had the Marines landed. And so when this thing first started, the U.S. president was William McKinley. We go from McKinley to who's the next guy? Grover Cleveland is the next president of the U.S. in 1894. Grover Cleveland, a Democrat. So the U.S. goes from a Republican to a Democrat in 1894, and the Democrat Grover Cleveland sends a special investigator to Hawaii named James Blount. And James Blount's, the conclusion of his investigation is something to the tune of landing these Marines was illegal, was not in the U.S. interest to land these. It was not in the Hawaiian interest to land these. I'm heavily paraphrasing what James Blount had to say, but the heavily paraphrased part is, the America just got taken for a ride by these international businessmen, and American military muscle was used and abused on behalf of these international business tycoons for their own good, not the good of the U.S. or the Hawaiian Kingdom. So after that report is done, the Marines leave. But by the time the Marines have left, these sugar planters have hired for themselves a mercenary army called the Honolulu Rifles. And so they dig in. There's a couple of battles between them and some Hawaiian nobles like Prince Kohila and Robert Wilcox. They keep the Queen under house arrest. And then we go through this pretty dark time because as these battles intensify, they declare themselves now to be the Republic of Hawaii from like 1893 to 1898. And that's a really dark 3 years. There are a bunch of PhD candidates right now that use the term genocide pretty loose 3 years. I don't know if they're right or wrong, but we are talking about a time period where notable Hawaiian people, like our Supreme Court judges, people who are outstanding citizens, are being disappeared into dungeons. So it's not a pretty time, those 3 years. And during that time, the U.S.'s war with Spain is really heating up. And the U.S. technically has rights to coal their warships at Pearl Harbor, as that was leased to the U.S., but no other port in Hawaii, because Hawaii is officially a neutral country. Now, the sugar planters, they're doing everything they can to angle for an annexation of Hawaii into the U.S. because they know without that, their lives and property will eventually be forfeit at this point. They're a bunch of dicks. So they're really angling for this annexation thing. So at first they're trying to open up ports, but then they realize it's more in their interest that if the U.S. puts coal ships or puts their warships into other ports that aren't Pearl Harbor, they should, hit them with fines and penalties and punish them for that. And this kind of starts a domino effect, which leads to, American top military brass and lawmakers being like, well, what the hell? I mean, why don't we just conquer the whole place? That would really help out the war effort, wouldn't it? And that along with lots of lobbying and money spurs this, quote, annexation. Now, my understanding of annexation in U.S. law and general international is that it requires a treaty. And so what we think of is, the tenets of international law today, I'm going to say it hasn't changed much since 1498. And the Treaty of Westphalia in Europe. This is what sets up, more or less, the modern nation-state system we know today, as in a state with a defined territory, borders, population, monopoly of violence, and the ability to conduct international relations. And these things are kind of codified for European states around that time with the Treaty of Westphalia. And so this, if you take all that customary law and you bring it more specifically to domestic U.S. law, my understanding is that in order to annex land, the U.S. requires you can have a treaty of annexation, which is, two parties agree that this land is this or that and changing hands for whatever. We saw how that went sometimes in the U.S. with First Nations. But there is still there's, the idea is the Europeans have to secure this treaty. That's how their fucking system works. So, so you're supposed to have this treaty of annexation, or of course you can have a treaty of conquest. Think U.S.-Mexico War, there's lots of examples you can think of for treaties of conquest, I'm sure. But when two nations are at war, the winning nation gets to hit the losing nation with whatever terms they want, and that can include annexation. Mm-hmm. But Hawaii and the U.S. were never at war. There's no treaty of conquest. There's no treaty of annexation. These guys that were, more or less in de facto military control of Hawaii in 1898, they were still recognized by U.S. lawmakers as not having the authority on behalf of the Hawaiian people or the Hawaiian Kingdom. They were recognized as insurgents. So, the U.S. lawmakers understood they could not treat with these guys. But this doesn't stop them.
Who would have been considered to have been in charge of Hawaii before the annexation? Was it just that they didn't know who it was?
No, no, yeah. So I would say so to take it a step back, like I was I'm calling them pseudo Americans and sugar planters. These guys are, you probably heard it, but these guys are like, descendants of the original American mission. They form a political party called the Missionary Party, and I don't know how many people. It's like 1,000, couple thousand maybe, within the Missionary Party, and these are all like a lot of your landed, wealthy sort of European types in Hawaii join this Missionary Party, and so they're quite wealthy because these are the big landowners.
But it was still contested between them and Liliuokalani at this point, right?
Yes. Oh, okay. So we need to clarify one thing real fast here. So this Treaty of Conquesting is a big deal. And so if we go all the way back to King Kamehameha III now, with the writing of the Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution, Kamehameha III was well schooled. He spoke French, English, and Hawaiian, and so he was well aware of this Treaty of Conquesting. He took great interest in the Mexican-American War as it happened. So he learned that this is like kind of the European game. That, like, the Europeans show up, they aggress you, and then when you defend yourself, the Europeans are like, "We're at war now, and so we will hit you with a Treaty of Conquest." So during the reign of Kamehameha III, Hawaii is attacked by France twice. They sack Honolulu twice. And Kamehameha III is like, okay, my people, I get it. You're pissed. I get it. We could kill these French guys. We could sink their battleship. But then that means we would be at war with France, and they will send more battleships. And I don't know. So everybody stay calm. I'm going to write some letters. We're going to get this figured out, And so through diplomacy, he more or less, and same thing in 1838. Actually, the UK was the first country to overthrow and occupy Hawaii. The UK takes over Hawaii for like 9 months in 1838. And Kamehameha III said the same thing. Okay, everybody, stay calm. I'm going to write a letter to Queen Victoria. And we already had a robust diplomatic consul in Europe at that time. So he just had to get the letter to them. The people were already out there. So yeah, that almost sounds naive to me, knowing what little I know about British history. I mean, how many people went to the British? Yeah, they went to the British and they were like, "Please, sir, can we have our country back?" And the British were like, "Fuck no!" But in the case of Hawaii, they were like, "Yeah." And a new admiral came out and returned the throne to Kamehameha III. And there's a whole ceremony that we could talk about as a whole episode. But the important part here is that, they give the throne back to Kamehameha III, so he basically has a non-violent foreign policy, and that's what's good for his people. And part of the reason he's such a good diplomat is he's playing this sort of competitive international political thing that we see today. Like, he's pitting the U.S. against France, against Great Britain, to keep them all in check against each other. Guy was a fucking genius, and so is most of the Hawaiian royalty, because they understood the system they were playing with. They were very educated. They knew. Kamehameha III went way out of his way to provide for the education, not just of the next generation of royals, but for the whole country. The Hawaiian Kingdom may well have been the most literate country on earth. But, I think I'm getting distracted from the questions at hand.
Yes. So President Grover sent someone over to Hawaii to determine who was in charge, what they could do.
So you can look him up. It's James Blount, the special investigator. James Blount, BLO. Today, Ohana, you guys, I got to tell you, again, I'm just one guy with a salty opinion, and I think you'll find I'm like 95% accurate. But there's like a 5% there. Some of it is on purpose and biased, and the other part, I'm just forgetting stuff. So it's worth double checking. But to conclude it there, so James Blount comes out. He finds these guys to be insurgents. They don't have the authority to treat on behalf of the Hawaiian people, which now puts the military side, the Republican military brass side of the U.S., which is advocating the takeover of Hawaii so they can extend their war and as a military, purely militarily. That's why they're advocating it, because they don't want to get in trouble for coaling in parts that aren't Pearl Harbor. They want to use all of Hawaii for the war effort in Spain. And now they have an issue because the Democrats on the other side that might be willing to work with them, they're saying like, no, we can't treat with these people. There can be no treaty of annexation. This is an issue, right? We can't actually move forward with any of these plans. But again, enough money and enough lobbying that happens in a very modern way, things start to change there. And eventually you have this special joint session of the U.S. House and of the U.S. Senate. And so all of the legislators come together for this joint special session in 1898. And they debate this bill, the annexation of Hawaii, which, again, this is a one-sided bill. It's not a treaty. The only thing that they have on behalf from the Hawaiian Kingdom is the surrender of Liliuokalani. But coming with that is a whole set of stuff that Even Grover Cleveland was promising Queen Liliuokalani the U.S. would help restore her to her throne after the Marines came in and messed it up. So although Liliuokalani surrendered to the U.S. president, there are now still standing executive orders that the U.S. is supposed to restore the Hawaiian throne, thanks to Grover Cleveland. But that doesn't happen either because in 1898, Grover Cleveland comes out of office and a Republican comes back in, and it's fucking McKinley again. So McKinley, he actually has a split term, his 2 terms. He's got his 4 years, and then Grover Cleveland is in the middle, and McKinley comes back. But McKinley just like starts pushing this thing through. He's full bore military conquest of like every island in the world. That's what he's in. And so they created this special session in 1898. And all the lawmakers come together to debate this bill. And I think my favorite part about it is the first guy to get up and talk is a senator from Texas. And he gets up in front of all of the assembled lawmakers of the U.S. and he says something like, "Friends, I'm from Texas. We like annexation." But then he says, "This isn't annexation. This is illegal, what we're talking about." So, these assembled lawmakers, they knew full and well that what they were doing was not a legal maneuver, not legal under U.S. domestic law, for that matter. But they wanted to move forward with this smoke and mirrors thing for, whatever benefits the U.S. saw in this. And, after that bill is passed, they have this annexation ceremony in Hawaii where the president of the Republic of Hawaii, Stanford B. Dole, so he's, not quite the ringleader of that missionary group, but he's close. And the president of the Republic of Hawaii, that's accused of many horrible crimes, has a ceremony with the U.S. minister, the U.S. ambassador, where he hands off a blank piece of paper to the U.S. ambassador as per the ceremony. And that paper was supposed to be the Treaty of Annexation. But because there's no Treaty of Annexation, it's a blank piece of paper. And they hand it back and forth. And they have a whole ceremony. And they're like, "Hawaii has now been annexed by the U.S. We're now a territory of the U.S." And meanwhile, there were like 9,000 people outside specifically protesting the annexation. Population of Hawaii at the time was probably 90,000 less.
Okay.
So, I don't know. It's really, Hawaii was dragged kicking and screaming into statehood. And the argument I would make today is not so much Hawaiian independence restoration or whatever. It's a blue pill matrix thing. Hawaii never stopped being a sovereign country. The question is, what do we do about that today?
So okay, before I ask what we do about it today, because you set me up perfectly for that, but before we do that, when I was there, and due to the fact that my partner Charlie is from Hawaii, I get the impression that the majority of the populace, or at least those who aren't like the elites, are still actually kind of upset about this whole thing and do not want to be part of the United States. Am I getting the right impression, or is this a minority view?
At the risk of undermining my own general position, Hawaii's kind of like Texas. It kind of depends on what day you ask the people. Some days they're going to be like, "Oh, Johnny America, Appleseed." And some days they're going to be like, "Ku'e, fuck that, we're our own country." That's, I would say, yeah, you facilitate somewhere between 50 to 70%. So it depends on what day you ask.
50 to 70% support independence?
Yeah, or at least, a better recognition of what's going on right now. Because did you know that the indigenous Hawaiian people are not a federally recognized indigenous people of the U.S.? That means they receive none of the same protections that other First Nations receive.
I did not know that. This brings me to a different question, though, which I found fascinating. You used the term earlier, kama'aina, I think it was? Kama'aina? Kama'aina. And I was unaware of this at the time. Like Stephen, for example, was born in Colorado. He considers himself Coloradan. I assumed that my partner was Hawaiian because not only was she born in Hawaii, but like her parents were and their parents. And she's very steeped in that culture. But she does not consider herself Hawaiian because that's a term reserved for the actual native Hawaiians. And what is kama'aina?
It means like neighbor. In the modern day word means resident of Hawaii.
And so that's the term most of the people who are like born in Hawaii and of the culture, but not actual blood descendants from Native Hawaiians, refer to themselves as.
Everyone. Kama'aina means neighbor.
So you said the question is what to do about this. What to do about this then?
Yeah, and I would like to just hammer back on this general thing right here, because generally the rhetoric of Dr. Kianasai is pretty well thought out. This guy is an international relations expert. He would be considered I'm definitely my professor. So, but he points out that the general laws here, once a country is under annexation, you can't just like move your citizens in and then be like, oh, they're born on the soil of this occupied territory, so that means they're also citizens of the occupied nation. Once the occupied nation's government has been destroyed, that doesn't mean that your citizens just get to join that government if it restarted. And you can find the best example of this is sadly, of course, Palestine. I mean, you can't just move the Israelis to the other side, and then if their Palestinian state comes up, they would be citizens of the Palestinian state too. I guess when you look at international law, my understanding is that there's two ways that citizenship is usually derived. One is called jus solis, and that's by right of birth on the soil. We understand that well in the U.S. The other one is jus sanguis, which is by right of blood. And we also have that in the U.S., right? If both your parents are American citizens, you are an American. And in Japan is largely jus sanguis, right? This right of blood, so that the citizenship passes down. So once the government is destroyed, there's no more jus solis. It's just jus sanguis, which is why I made the distinction between like 370,000 ethnic Hawaiian people and over 790,000 Hawaiian nationals today. Sadly, I am neither of those categories, but and it would be interesting to note, because for me, if Charlie's family were residents of the Hawaiian Kingdom, then they would still have citizenship. They would be Hawaiian national.
I believe on at least one of her grandparents' birth certificates, it says Kingdom of Hawaii. So,
yeah, but the question is, is that like a naturalization, like birth certificate for a subject? Because we don't call them citizens, we call them subjects, but same difference. Then that would mean that Charlie would very possibly be part of the 790,000 people.
Aha, neat. So what exactly are they doing? Because I don't know, like they're not taking up arms. How do you agitate for this sort of splitting away of the state?
Yeah, the Queen basically swore us to nonviolence. But yeah, so I mean, there's two main camps here, and I should take a moment and say, yeah, it's been a while since I got out and got all ku'e with people. I mean, the last time was 2019, for goodness sakes. Like, I mean, when was the last time you even saw half my sovereign friends? It's been a while. Because 2019 was the big protest on Mauna Kea, right? That was awesome. Like, I've seen people I hadn't seen in a long time, and we were all just hanging out down there at the bottom of the road. They started a little university.
What happened in 2019 on Mauna Kea?
Oh, that's so this is like second round of the big protests around the 30-meter telescopes in 2019. From January 2019 to the end of December in 2019, the road was blocked because Hawaiian elders had chained themselves to the road, and then an additional 7,000 people came up to like block the road and support them. And so for like 6 months, no one could go up and down that road, which means that we can't run tours on Mauna Kea. God, I fucking hate the fact I'm a Mauna Kea tour guide, but I love it. I love the mountain. I just and then I got to take it really serious because like if you're on my van, and I hope you were with me, it wasn't just like, oh, this is just another fucking package tour. It was like, no, I'm going to induct you.
It was fantastic.
Into the knowledge of my home, whether or not my elders agree with it, if you will. And regardless of what my real position is, and again, my position is like a Hawaiian national in waiting.
What were they protesting specifically?
I mean, to say they were protesting the new telescope on Mauna Kea specifically is yes and no. I guess I'm famous for the yes and no. Because on the one hand, yeah, they're pissed off about the new telescope for various reasons. One, all that land, 33% of all the land in Hawaii is crown lands. They're supposed to belong to the Hawaiian monarch. They're kept in a trust for, quote, the betterment of the Hawaiian people. And that trust was created in 1962 or maybe 1963, and they called it the Ceded Lands Trust. It wasn't ceded. But they call it the Ceded Lands Trust. I think it's mostly administered by DLNR. And then, so they created that trust in 1962 or 1963. And then 5 years later, in 1968, the state of Hawaii is like, oh, we're going to parse this land trust, and we're going to lease the summit of Mauna Kea to the University of Hawaii at Hilo for a 65-year lease. So that's 1968 to 2030. And of course, as far as I can tell, there was not a single Hawaiian person in that room when the trust for, quote, the betterment of the Hawaiian people was parsed. But that's how things was back in the 19th. But then, Mauna Awakea is Hawaii's sacred mountain. So, every single telescope on that mountain was protested by the Hawaiian people in one way or another. The first telescope was built up there in 1968. The second telescope was up there in 1970. And that one in 1970, the UH 88-inch telescope, the 2.2 meter, the University of Hawaii one. It has a schnoz. It's the white one that looks like it's got a schnoz.
Oh yeah.
And so that's the one from 1970, and that's the one they destroyed the original summit of the mountain to build. I don't remember how much they took off the top, like 60 feet, but up there at the summit is, of course, where people kept their altars and spiritual sites. Not everybody got a chance to move those things before the university summarily destroyed the area. That opens a pretty deep mistrust between the Hawaiian community and the university. Despite those protests and whatnot, telescope building continues apace, and it's not until 1987 that the university gets around to discussing the management on A'awakea with the kahu, the traditional caretakers, and they come to a written agreement which states, and I quote, "There should be no more than 13 telescopes on the summit of Mauna Kea, and before a new one is built, an older telescope shall be removed and the land returned to its natural state." End quote. So this 30-meter telescope is telescope 14. And while I can make some decent defenses for the university on why it's telescope 14, I cannot defend how stupid of a choice that was. I mean, if they had followed their general agreements understanding, they would have pissed off, 10% of the fact that they just like arrogantly bulldozed forward. Really, I mean, even if there are defenses about why they did that, it still looks really bad from like a political optical standpoint. Like, you guys, where's your PR person? Because you fucked up. So, I mean, I would say those are kind of the main gist, at least for me. That's what I tell everybody. You know, if I have to encapsulate this thing down to a few minutes, those are some of the main points of why the protests were happening. But, here's the thing, real fast. The telescope is almost a casualty, right? I mean, the greater issue here is like a rhetorical yes or no question. Do native people get to control native land? That's probably more what's happening there. I mean, the telescope, yes, but anyway, go for it, you guys.
Is there any way to actually go forward and have independence reinstated? Because it does. I don't see the U.S. giving up control without some sort of insurrection happening.
Well, good news. I mean, we don't actually have to fucking talk about independence for the Hawaiian people to reassert claims to their land, right? Or at least I should hope not. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some people are more intense than others. I've been in rooms, everybody's all ku'e, ku'e. I've been in rooms, everybody's all ku'e, ku'e. We independent country. We gonna tell the U.S. who's boss, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody brought up king and queen, and then nobody gets along, which is why that issue is now on the back burner.
Okay.
We're gonna put that all the way over there. We'll deal with that ideally in 100 years or whatever. But
what does ku'e mean?
Ku'e is like attack, but it's also like, it just means like aggression, or I mean, maybe I should bring up the strict definition, but yeah, but the rooms are ku'e, ku'e, we gonna be independent, and I'm over there like, bro, you ever read about Kurdistan? No? You ever heard of Catalan, my brother? You never heard of that place? Maybe you should wiki that shit before.
Yeah. Huh. So I guess the first question I have is, like, if there is a greater independence won, is there any plans for what to do with the people like yourself who are not nationals? Like, what would happen? I'm advocating. Well, first off, I no matter what anybody wants to say, I'm gonna just go ahead and say that if you wanna build or rebuild or rejuvenate a nation, you know what you need? Everyone. You need everyone. You need everyone that's willing to get aboard. You need every single person. So it would not be wise to make it exclusive. But there's no real consensus about any of these things. But I would say, yeah, personally, you want everybody, anybody that's on board, given whatever the Hawaiian Kingdom decides is the naturalization test, that can be it. Pass it or don't. But like back in the day, Robert Crichton Wiley would make people burn and spit on the flags of their home countries should they like to become a Hawaiian Kingdom national. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say, because at some level here, what's going on, and it's funny because listening to you guys' previous episodes, you guys are talking about monarchy like philosophical exercise. Yeah, I don't get to pick the form of my government, right? So that being said, I do get to pick the form of my government, correct? And it's a question of loyalty, and that's the part that I've solved for myself. But what happens next? I don't know. Let's say the Hawaiian King comes back and we get a noble that's a total fucking asshole, and he's like, everybody out. If you're not ethnic Hawaiian, you got to get out of the fucking country. Well, I'm going to lobby against that. I'm not going to kill anybody over it. And if I get kicked out of the country, then so be it. If I carried the torch that far and then I got fucked over, I don't even care. Okay. Are you familiar with I think it's the Independence Project, where a whole bunch of, I think it was libertarians, wanted to move to New Jersey and turn it into a libertarian enclave. I don't think there's nearly as many monarchists in the U.S., but if someone did want to try to help support a monarchy breakaway state, do you think a bunch of people from the U.S. trying to move to Hawaii to help, would they be welcome there? Would this be at all something reasonable?
Shit, man. So ku'e, to define ku'e is to oppose, resist, protest, oppose, versus, adverse, contrary, antagonistic, unwilling, objection. Ho'oku'e, to cause opposition, to stir up resistance. And, yeah, I don't know about that, man. I think support for indigenous people's rights there you go. That's what we need to do first and foremost, because that's part of the issue, and that's part of the reason why I am so all in. Because what we see today is not the final form of relation between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the U.S. government. What this final form of relation will look like, I don't know, but it's not done.
Okay, so probably a bad idea for outsiders to try to go there and support monarchy.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that, like, it makes me uncomfortable. You brought this up on tour, Yanesh. You said, I forget what you called it. There's a movement to restore monarchy. That's fucking weird, man. I don't know about restoring the shit. When it's a cultural tradition, I don't know. I think it's important to uphold traditions. But, yeah, bringing it back, like, no, I can't. I mean... I have so much to say on that point, but it requires a discussion of the nation-state system and what a nation is, right?
Yeah. Would there be? How would they decide at least who the Senate would be, who the Prime Minister would be, that sort of thing? Is there any plans in the works for that, or is this something that we figure out once we've gotten further down the road?
Yeah, there's a couple opposing camps. So one of the camps really wants to like move forward with the nation within a nation sort of blood quantum ethnic thing that we see with other First Nations. They tried to start a voter roll in like 2014, maybe 2013. It was called Ka'ui Noa. And so they tried to just get everybody to sign up that was whatever their qualifications were for a Native Hawaiian person.
You tried to start a what?
Voter... What was that? A voter roll, like just like voter registration.
Okay.
To see how many voters would be available to vote in a potential election for the Hawaiian Kingdom. And at this point, right, all of the qualifications we used to have in the Constitution are just kind of being laughed off. They just want anybody that's ethnically Hawaiian to register. And so, but the generalized plan would be once you get your population of whoever's going to be the voters, like what's this Hawaiian Kingdom citizenship look like, then they vote in the House of Commons. We technically know more or less who the House of Lords would be because that's a titled thing. But once the House of Commons is assembled, and that's direct democracy, just like the UK. That's just the people vote for the representative. Once that's assembled, then that can help sort out issues for the House of Lords. And now we have our two chambers of legislators are now convened. And with those, they can elect the prime minister from among themselves, fill the ministerial positions, and fill the court position, court justice.
Okay. Has anyone ever proposed putting a proposition to the general populace to vote on to secede from the Union?
Again, my argument is that we never joined. You can't secede if you never secede.
That's a good point.
But didn't they join on paper?
Yeah, I don't know where the paper is. Lili Okalani surrendered to the U.S. and was promised that her throne would be returned. That's what we got on paper.
I see. Yeah, I guess I just figured, like, it's disappointing. And for the one thing, I guess I realize I haven't spoken in like an hour. This has been an awesome history lesson. Your profession as a lecturer is really coming through. I guess this is good and bad. I learned more in the last hour about the history of Hawaii than I did in my entire education up until this point.
I'm glad to hear that. So and I just want to say real fast, Stephen, don't you be afraid to tell me you're fucking wrong or an idiot, Travis. Go for it. All good.
No, I don't know. I so far I have nothing to contribute on that score. But no, I just meant like it's a bummer that 12 years of primary education in the U.S. and we probably touched on Hawaii at some point, but not a lot to give me any context. The motion to secede, I guess, like, yeah, presumably it's on paperwork somewhere, but I'm sure that, this had the historical context of an annexation, which is like, okay, well, fuck us, I guess, if you say so. Like, how do you, I don't think that there's a way to convincingly argue with the country that kind of came in and said, we live here now. So,
well, let's talk about that for a second here, because, for the first time ever in 2015, there are more hula halals outside of Hawaii than in Hawaii. Fuck, there's poke restaurants in like the middle of fucking Wyoming at this point.
Had a bunch.
What are hula halals? Sorry, didn't know how to pronounce it.
Sorry, hula halals are hula schools. I guess, but my point here is that the ascendancy in general of Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian language. I mean, it's coming back strong. Aloha will eventually conquer the world. Aloha being love, by the way. So that part, it's interesting. I mean, only since the 70s the Hawaiian Renaissance began, and since the 70s we went from having an almost extinct language to having like 10,000 people that speak it fluently, and many of them aren't even ethnically Hawaiian. And so actually, the 10,000 is like ethnic Hawaiians. But the people who aren't ethnic Hawaiians that speak the language are growing too. Yeah, I guess, and let me put it this way, because again, I've been in rooms where everybody's got different ideas. I personally, here's what I'm saying. I don't want to see that independence referendum anytime soon, because when it happens, I want to win. And so that means I probably have to wait like a century. This is not something that is worth chasing. It's kind of like the telescope, the things in the heavens, they don't change much every year. We measure them in the hundreds of millions of fucking years. What if we wait 20 years to build the telescope? Who cares? I mean, have patience. And in that regard, we're talking about a hole that's 130 years old. The queen was overthrown in 1893. You're going to walk back out of that hole? It's going to take you 130 years. That's a multi-generational project. It's going to be your grandkids that's declaring independence. In the meantime, though, all of these little things are important battles for the Hawaiian people so that they have better lives. All of these little things are going to be important battles for the residents, the non-ethnic Hawaiian people of Hawaii will have better lives. There's a lot of things we can do to shirk off some federal government bullshit. But when I start to put it like that, my issues start to sound like who's paying taxes to who and for what, and what laws apply when you leave that military base. Kind of sound like any other state, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But I think these are all important questions. And again, pushing forward and progressing and advancing, at some level here, the cause of the Kanaka Maoli is very important to me. And this happens to be the nation that they founded. This happens to be the nation that they're trying to restore with different strategies. Some people, again, want to embrace the nation within the nation. Other people want to continue to use the UN to pressure the U.S. And the Hawaiian Kingdom has appeared in the International Court of Justice over a dozen times at this point. So, yeah, I don't know what comes next, but I think if independence is like someone's goal, there's a couple things we're going to have to do. First off, we got to become a net exporter of tax revenue as opposed to a net importer. I remember I had a guy in my car one time. He was all kuye. And I'm like, who do you think paid for this highway? Thanks, federal government. So there's an aspect here of like, you want to declare independence tomorrow, we're all going to be broke as fuck, my man, and we're all going to starve because we import 96% of our food stuff.
Texas has a similar vibe.
Yeah, that's why. So I'm glad to hear. I've never been to Texas now. I went to North America once for like a couple days. I really wasn't there. So I've never been to Texas. But I always assumed there's kind of a similar vibe to Hawaii in that regard.
Oh yeah, let me qualify that. I've changed planes in Texas once. No, what I meant is that there's an attitude, at least that I've encountered online, of Texan independence, desirability, that sort of thing. But they are also one of the largest, if not the largest, receivers of federal benefits. And so if they successfully seceded, they'd just be immediately fucked like a week later. A retreat plan definitely needs to be in order.
Yeah, and so I hear you on that 100%. We want to be serious about this goal, and I'm relatively serious about this goal. I'm really a long-term thinker. So, we're going to do about that. So, first off, we should probably bring back agriculture. Unlike Texas, we can grow whatever the fuck we want in Hawaii all year round. All year round. Potentially one of the most agriculturally productive places in the world, and we have no agriculture. So, that needs to change, and part of bringing back the agriculture should come with indigenous people getting back the land to do indigenous agriculture and indigenous stuff with proper subsistence. So that would make us more food secure. That's going to take a generation or more. Also, here's one that people like to bring up all the time too, is the Jones Act. So this one is a little bit more concrete, if you will. Mm-hmm. The Jones Act requires that any goods coming from a foreign country to the U.S. must first go into an internationally licensed U.S. port, and the goods from that ship must be put upon a U.S.-made vessel with a U.S. crew, and then it can be distributed to a domestic U.S. port. So this adds lots of money to the shit that we're importing, because sometimes it has to go past us to the port of L.A. and then come back. So there's a cost of living aspect there that I think is, here's another cost of living thing. First off, how many Hawaiians is in jail thanks to minor drug offenses for marijuana? That's fucking insane. Marijuana is not even an illegal substance. So that's the tragedy on its own right. But you know what else is a tragedy? Once upon a time, Hawaii was famous for our weed. Not even that long ago. It's just like a couple decades back. Everybody knew what fucking Maui was. And now what? Now fucking Colorado is kicking our asses.
Even I've heard of Maui Wowie, and I am not a drug enthusiast.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if we could just like grow some weed and put Hawaii's name on it, but come on, Amsterdam, let's go.
It's worked good for Colorado's revenue.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, I think, but that's I guess what I'm getting at here, and I don't want to come off ever too extreme, because I'm talking about the history of two nations, and I'm trying to talk about their relationship. And that relationship is so fucking intertwined that sometimes it's hard to tell where one begins and the other ends. And honoring that thing as a whole means that, yeah, these little fights that Hawaii is going to have, I hope, to assert kind of greater control, I hope that it will be a positive sort of ripple effect, because we're all kind of in still a greater commonwealth, a greater sort of federal system, and the states still have a lot of rights, and that's a good thing. I mean, but if we could play on what the states' rights look like, we could even potentially just take off the current Hawaiian state constitution and replace it with the Hawaiian Kingdom. I don't know. There's a lot of ways this could go, and but yeah, if we want to get to the military thing real fast, that's the other one. We want Pearl Harbor gone. Pearl Harbor got to get out of here. Okay, how you gonna get rid of Pearl Harbor, my brother? We've been calling the People's Liberation Army. What the fuck? Look. I'm okay. Look, we're quickly approaching the maximum of the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So Pearl Harbor is probably not going anywhere. And more to the point, within the Hawaiian community, only about half of these ethnic Hawaiian people live in Hawaii. The other half live abroad. And one of the more populous states for Hawaiian people is West Virginia. And the reason West Virginia is because so many is involved in the U.S. military. Within your 790,000 Hawaiian citizens today, these national Hawaiians, some of them are high-ranking military officers. They have access to American nuclear secrets. The defense of Hawaii and the U.S. are pretty intertwined. I don't know how you entwine that. I have no answers. And more to the point, so much Hawaiian blood and treasure has already been spilt in the defense of the United States that I see no reason necessarily to untangle it. Hawaiians fought on both sides of the War of 1812, both for and against the United States. Hawaiians fought on both sides of the U.S. Civil War. Hawaiians fought in the British versus Zulu War. I guess that's a different point. But hey, famously, though, a Hawaiian man beheaded a Moroccan prince. He got a medal from Queen Victoria herself. And of course, Hawaiians fought in every major American conflict since then.
So what is, we're running out of time, so we should probably wrap up. What is the one thing that makes you most optimistic right now for this sort of return of power to the Hawaiians in the future?
I think when I say this, I want to qualify it. There's a long way to go. But, I would say in North America, not just the U.S., but Canada, we're seeing a little bit of a reckoning, with the indigenous voices and indigenous knowledge, and we're seeing them getting more respect. And I hope it continues that trend there. That's all very positive. I mean, it's like, the Pope just apologized for that shit up in Canada. And it's like, hey, I didn't expect that to happen. But that's nice. He has some nice words. Now what you going to do about it, Pope, man? That part gives me, as far as for Hawaii and this greater thing, the greater respect for indigenous people that I feel like is growing is good. It's good. It's not just good for the indigenous people. It's good for the United States.
Do you have a good go-to source? Since I won't be able to make a tour on your bus at any point in the near future, any source for future research that you can point us towards?
There's a couple books that I would just throw out to start with. One of my favorite ones is called The Legends and Myths of Hawaii. You know what? I'm just going to tell you some good beginning books. It's just like Hawaiian history. Anyway, my favorite ones that is good starters. There's a book called The Legends and Myths of Hawaii, written by King David Kalakaua. It's a great book. It's 30 plus short stories, Hawaiian short stories, legends and myths. And you'll see Kalakaua has this thing he likes to do where he's trying to make the myths it's real historiography. And he gets close because it's probably true. Especially in a society that doesn't have writing, where the interplay between truth and legend is hard to say. So, but it's very good. And David Kalakaua, being the fan he was of world mythology, having volumes on Chinese, Egyptian, Babylonian, North European, African mythology, he wanted to add a Hawaiian mythology, the World Lexicon, which is this book, The Legends and Myths of Hawaii by Kalakaua. So it's got a bunch of great history. It's got a bunch of great short stories, but the first part of it is a foreword on Hawaiian history and the origin of the Hawaiian people. Very good. Give him a mulligan. He wrote that book in 7. When you get to the anthropology section, just get ready. We don't use terms like that no more. Another really good book. It's actually, I like this one a lot because it's a big, ugly yellow book, so it's easy to find. The big, ugly yellow book is called The Rise and Fall of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So obviously I got issues with the title, but it's by Dick Wisniewski. Don't ask me how to spell wisdom. But this guy put together a good book. Partially it's good because he has lots of pictorials. Yeah, like I say, the whole point is it's a big, ugly little book with a pictorial history. So you have all the big, long Hawaiian names, and you got the portraits of the people there to help it straight. So it's a good book. The Rise and Fall of the Hawaiian Kingdom by Dick Wisniewski. We sell that one in our gift shops. And then another really good one, if you want to know more about those pseudo-American sugar planters I love so well. there's a book called Unfamiliar Fishes by a historian you guys might have even heard of. Her name is Sarah Vowell. Vowell. This is a really good beginner Hawaiian history book, if only because she gets you right into like the history of the missionaries. And she herself is one of the snarkiest historians you've ever read in your life. When I first started reading, I was like, "How's this chick? You know, like why are you throwing in?" But then as I got into it, I loved it. And then one more to throw out, and this one is of course the big shout out for my 4 books to go here. It's called Uamau Ke'ea. But it's by Dr. Keanusai. And getting Dr. Keanusai's book is a good start there. You can also find pretty much his original doctoral thesis and most of what's in the book on his website, HawaiianKingdomGovernment.org.
Cool. If is there, for the more online sort of people, is there like website? Is there a podcast, anything like that is easier to consume like on your phone while you're, I don't know, standing in line at a DMV as well?
You know, Hawaii. I'm trying to find Dr. Keanusai's website right now. Yeah, HawaiianKingdomGovernment.org, and the blog that goes with it should be relatively accessible on the phone. And on that website, you can find the Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution too, and you'll find it was great, a great constitution. Everything that should be illegal is illegal. Most committed crime in the Hawaiian Kingdom: furious riding, speeding on your horse. But then the other part too is besides, like, you can find the penal code and the criminal code, all that, whatever. But you also find the text of the Constitution, and you'll find that Kamehameha III, besides stealing the organs of Britain, you know, the House of Lords, he felt that he was worried the common people would continue to be taken advantage of by the nobles. So Kamehameha III gave his people a Bill of Rights. Article 1, the right to life, liberty, and the protection of your property. Article 2 is the freedom to worship as your conscience dictates. And Article 3 was like a freedom of assembly and speech. I mean, we still had a law against insulting the king, but it's a great constitution. He took what was good about France and the UK, mixed it up, left behind what he didn't like, took what he liked, put it into Hawaiian language, and boom, the Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution.
Well, Travis, is there anything you want to leave us with before we wrap up here? I know we've been going for quite a while, so if there is,
I love it, and you know, gentlemen, I look forward to maybe even hearing your dissection of the stuff that I said, because I suspect you'll find some inaccuracies. I'll be honest with that, but I'm close. Yeah, so I guess on final, I'll have to, because I've been talking about this for a couple of weeks now. Like, oh my god, I gotta do this podcast. These guys' episodes, they're freaking 2 hours, man. I gotta listen to some before I do the podcast. But oh my god, when I got 2 hours, and then so anyway, I finally got to it, and I like the show. I think you guys do a good job. I look forward to hearing your dissection and discussion of it. But okay, so closing remark. Sorry. Yeah. I promised my Bulgarian buddy Anton, who recently got way into Sadhguru's topsoil campaign, the biggest threat facing our species is topsoil erosion. And it's one of the most soluble things that we could take care of, you know? This is an artificial crisis. If we just paid attention to our soil, we could stop this soil erosion. But this was the first thing that people brought up. You know, Thomas Malthus and the population bomb. Before anybody was talking about global warming and nuclear annihilation, we were already like, oh my god, the topsoil is eroding. So, yeah. So I promised my Bulgarian buddy I would throw out the topsoil erosion.
Excellent. It'll be in the episode, and if you have like a link that we can link to, we'll put that in the show notes.
Oh yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
Cool.
But yeah, thank you, Three, and I look forward to your next episodes and episodes into the future.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you on, and I certainly learned a lot.
Yeah, same here. This was great. I really appreciate it. And
nice.
Thanks for accommodating the technical difficulties and time difference.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Mahalo, you guys.
Hey,
right.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good one.
You too.
Aloha.
All right, well, shall we move into the less wrong posts?
That sounds like a good plan.
The first less wrong post we had this week was argument screens off authority, which makes basically the exact argument that is in the title, that a good technical argument is one that eliminates reliance on the personal authority of the speaker, assuming, of course, that the listener has enough technical ability to process the argument.
Back, remember in the old awesome days of arguing with the religious people in the heyday of New Atheism?
Mm-hmm.
People would be like, well, you know, you just believe the universe is 13 point whatever billion years old because that's what scientists say. And what's fun about it is like, yeah, but in principle, I could go learn all that shit for myself and either conclude or something that concurs with that or otherwise. But like the fact is, like, if Stephen Hawking says that the universe is 13 point whatever billion years old, like that actually is evidence that it is. So it's not true because he's saying it. It's that because Stephen Hawking is saying it, I can trust that it's true, right?
Yeah. I believe the quote from the post is, if something is true, then it therefore tends to have arguments in favor of it, and the experts therefore observe these evidences and change their opinions, in theory. So if we see that an expert believes something, we infer back to the existence of evidence in the abstract. And from the existence of this abstract evidence, we infer back to the truth of the proposition. But he points out, if you know the value of the argument node, this separates the truth from the expert belief, so you don't need the expert.
Right. If I do, I'm trying to think of literally anything I have a sufficient amount of expertise in that I wouldn't trust someone who knew more than me about it. Well, I guess I wouldn't need to trust them more than me.
Did you say sinks, Jace?
Steven's been taking apart a lot of things lately.
Oh yeah, that's
Nice.
yes. I mean, if someone tried to sell me on some whatever, or another stupid, pointless example, but I had some whatever air duct cleaning done a couple years ago, and the guy's trying to sell me on like some $75 air filter, and was explaining how it was awesome and reusable because you needed to wash it, and like then it would be reusable. And I'm like, no, are you fucking kidding? I'm not going to wash something that is supposed to catch like pollen.
Mhm.
It'll never ever get dry. Like even I know that, and I'm an idiot. So anyway, and he didn't convincingly argue. If he had given me a good argument, maybe I would have believed him. But his argument was, I had a coupon for like a $20 air duct cleaning, and that wasn't enough for him to make a trip out here. So he tried to sell me on something worth his money or worth his time. But yeah.
The point is made that if these two things are asymmetrical, because if you know what the authority thinks, you're still interested in hearing the arguments. But if you know the arguments fully, you have very little left to learn from authority.
That's a really good point. I'm sufficiently versed in biological evolution that I don't need to lean on, well, Richard Dawkins says this, for me to have an opinion on something. So if I want to hear his take, it's really just because I'm curious, right? Yeah.
He does end with the caveat that in practice, you can never completely eliminate reliance on authority. Good authorities are more likely to know about any counter evidence that exists and should be taken into account. So, this is more of an ideal, but it's also an important thing to know and to consider that, like, the arguments are more important than the credentials of the people making the arguments.
Seems like a good or important thing to keep in mind to kind of inoculate yourself against the argument for authority. If you find yourself making it, or someone else makes an argument from authority, you can think, like, does this argument stand on its own if it wasn't a quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson? And pointed out also that, like, you should be able to follow, like, the chain of logic and have evidence. It just, sort of, like, re-clarifying what they mean by a good technical argument.
Yeah, I feel like this was a timely post, again, explaining the difference between argument from authority and argument bolstered by authority, because this was during that kind of heyday of online argument I was reminiscing on.
Well, that brings us to the next post, Hug the Query.
It was a good little query.
For some reason, the name just doesn't roll off the tongue. Maybe because Hug the Query is whatever. I liked the quote, and I remember this from probably the first time I read it, and I didn't know who to attribute it to. I've been in my head attributing it to Yudkowsky, but he's citing somebody named Jerry Cleaver. What does you in is not a failure to apply some high-level, intricate, complicated technique. It's overlooking the basics, not keeping your eye on the ball. And that's my one-sentence summary of this. Like, just actually remember what the hell it is you're talking about.
Yep. He's saying that, since arguments screen off authority, you always want to get as close to the original question as possible to screen off as many other things as possible. He gave the example of the Wright brothers, who were, accomplished bicycle makers and, amateur physicists, and Lord Kelvin, who did not think that something heavier than air could fly. And Lord Kelvin obviously had a lot more authority, but if you were to get arguments from both of them, the Wright brothers' arguments would probably be better. And if you were just to directly observe their prototype plane flying, then you don't even need the arguments. So the closer you get to the thing in question without intermediate inferences such as arguments or authorities, the more powerful the evidence is.
It's always kind of a fun, just powerful move if you're in an argument with somebody and they're like, oh yeah, what's your evidence? Because you're trying to explain like why you think a plane could fly. And you just point to the thing in the sky over there. You're like, there's my proof. And it's like suddenly, oh, okay, I don't need to follow your math anymore. I can see what you see. Observation counts for a lot of evidence.
And he points out that if you can point to close arguments or even better, direct evidence, it doesn't, the rationality aspect of someone doesn't remember. He asks, it doesn't matter. He asks who was more rational, the Wright brothers or Lord Kelvin? If we can check their calculations, we don't have to care. The virtue of a rationalist cannot directly cause a plane to fly. And he points out that if you forget this principle, learning about more biases will hurt you because it will distract you from more direct arguments. If there are biased reasons to say the sun is shining, that doesn't make it dark out.
Good point there, too. I remember back in the heyday of atheists arguing with religious people, there were like the people who got so obsessed with cognitive biases that they would memorize them. And it was clearly just like people trying to win debates rather than actually figure out what the truth was. Or like probably some of both, but that instinct to just kind of memorize all the biases so you can be like, aha, that's a straw man. Aha, that's, is not really keeping your eye on the ball there.
Yeah, as somebody who did probably memorize the name of
sometimes.
Yeah, I probably memorized the names of 20 or 30 logical fallacies and had fun noticing them and pointing them out. I'd like to think I was a young little truth seeker back then, but I was going to say it's entirely plausible. Let's be real. I was almost definitely biasedly pushing my own positions, just like I probably am now, but I'm hopefully more aware of it now.
In summary, try to screen off further out inferences if you can, because the closer in ones are always have better, more information, and hug the query. Get as close as you can at all times. These two went really quick because I thought they were just, quick, solid, tells you exactly what you need to know.
No, yeah, I mean, it says what it is right on the box.
Yeah.
Well, for next time, our two less wrong posts will be Guardians of the Truth and Guardians of the Gene Pool.
Not to be confused with anything nefarious.
No. And one last thing before we go, we have to thank the patron who brought us all this wonderful information today and learning about the history of Hawaii. Who is thanking the patron today?
All right, I'll jump on this one. We forgot to grab you last week, Michael K. Sorry about that. But big double shout out for Michael K. this fortnight. We appreciate you, your support. I always feel weird saying thanks to people, but I support a lot of stuff on Patreon or online, various platforms, and I like that we've moved to like a method of consumption of stuff where you can just like support content creators directly. But the idea that like someone actually likes this enough to give us money still blows my mind. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. You've helped bring this to everybody, and everybody is grateful to you for it.
Trying to think of a joke about Hawaii.
We're glad that you did not bring in the U.S. military to overthrow our podcasting government.
Not all of our jokes can be winners, but that's no reflection on you, Michael. That's just a reflection on us. And it's been an overcast day today. I think everyone's running a little hazy. So anyway, that's all I've got.
Thanks, guys, for joining us. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And we will see you all in 2 weeks.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.